The dust clung to the goat's legs, and the camp went strangely quiet. Not because that animal was guilty, but because the people were afraid of what would remain on them if it did not leave. You need to hear that from the start. The ones who push blame fast, the ones who seem desperate to name a problem and tie it to one person, are rarely at peace. They are frightened. Frightened of exposure, frightened of responsibility, frightened of what rises to the surface when there is no innocent back left to load down. And that is why the scapegoat matters more than most people realize. In Leviticus 16, on the Day of Atonement, one goat was set apart and sent away bearing the sins of the community, the people's sins. The high priest laid both hands on its head and confessed the wrongs of the nation over it, as if guilt could be named, gathered, and placed on a living carrier. Then that creature was driven into the wilderness alone, carrying blame that was never yours. And yes, I said yours, because some of you have lived that pattern in rooms with carpet, fluorescent lights, family dinners, group chats, and church smiles. Number 1, you were never hated for what they said you did. You were selected because the system needed a bearer. That is the part most people miss. Modern scapegoating still works the same way. A whole group feels tension, shame, envy, failure, or fear, and instead of facing it together, they single out one person to hold it. One innocent party gets assigned the emotional bill for what everybody helped create. Suddenly, the room gets lighter, not because truth showed up, but because pressure found a target. That's why some people only calm down after they've named you as the issue. If that sounds familiar, it's because your spirit has been reading the pattern before your mind had words for it. You felt the shift in the room. You heard the little changes in tone. You noticed how relief came over certain faces the moment suspicion moved in your direction. That wasn't your imagination. That was discernment. And the dangerous thing about discernment is this. Once you see how blame travels, you start asking who needed you to carry it. If this is already hitting home, make sure you like and subscribe, because in the next step, we need to talk about why the hands mattered more than the accusation. And that is where the hands come in, because the transfer was never only about words. In that old ritual, the high priest did not stand at a distance and think about the people's failures in silence. He put both hands on the animal's head. Contact, weight, pressure. Then he confessed the people's wrongs over it. That detail matters because blame likes touch. It likes to feel official. It likes a moment, a gesture, a tone, a meeting, a look across the table, some little public pause that says, "This one right here." The scapegoat was marked before it was sent. Number 2, what was laid on that creature was agreement. Do you hear me? Agreement. The community did not become innocent because its guilt had been named out loud. It only became relieved because guilt had been relocated. That is how this still works now. A tense room, a brittle silence, somebody avoiding their own part, somebody else eager to keep the peace at your expense. And suddenly, blame that was never yours lands in your lap with shocking confidence. Not because the facts are clean, not because the story is solid, but because enough people feel safer if the weight settles on one set of shoulders. That is why your spirit started picking up things before your mind could explain them. You felt the pressure in ordinary moments, the sharp little hush when you walked in, the forced laugh, the "we all care about you" speech that smelled off from the first sentence, the kind smile with cold eyes behind it. You were reading the transfer in real time. Discernment is not always thunder from heaven. Sometimes it is your chest tightening while everybody else pretends the air feels normal. Sometimes it is your body recognizing that hands are being placed on you, not to bless you, but to assign you a burden. And let me go deeper, because this is where people get trapped. Once that burden is placed, the next temptation is to explain yourself to death, to prove you are not what was spoken over you, to scrub your name until your hands are raw. But the ritual was never built on fairness in the first place. It was built on usefulness. The system needed a bearer, and it hoped you would cooperate by defending yourself inside a story designed to keep you carrying it. But the wilderness was waiting for more than exile, and that changes everything. And the wilderness was not just distance, it was exposure. Once the goat was outside the camp, all the noise stayed behind. No crowd, no priest, no hands, no voices agreeing on a story, just open land, dry wind, and the truth that the creature had carried something put on it by others. That matters for you, because exile has a way of stripping the room off the accusation. When you are no longer standing under everybody's stare, something begins to clear. Number 3. Being driven into the wilderness does not always mean you lost. Sometimes it means the false peace of a group could only survive if you were removed from it. That is a hard word, but it is a freeing one. A lot of people think rejection is proof that they were wrong. Not always. Sometimes a room expels the very person who makes its dishonesty harder to maintain. Sometimes your absence becomes the price of their comfort. And if you have ever felt that strange ache of being shut out while the people who misread you suddenly look relaxed, then you have already tasted how this works. Look at the ritual closely. The animal was not destroyed in front of the camp to prove justice had been done. It was sent away. That is important. The community's relief depended on displacement, not transformation. They felt lighter because the burden had been moved, not because hearts had changed. And modern blame works the same way. A tense family gets quiet after one person leaves. A friend group gets healthy once one name is missing from the chat. A team starts calling itself unified after the one honest voice goes silent. But that kind of peace has a smell to it. Stale, thin, fragile. It is relief borrowed from somebody else's exile. And here's why your discernment matters now more than ever. When you were in the middle of it, you may have thought, maybe if I explain better, they'll see. But once you are outside the camp, once the dust settles and the night air hits your face, you begin to understand something terrifying. They were not confused. Not all of them. Some were coordinated by fear. Some knew the story was crooked and stayed with it anyway because the arrangement benefited them. That realization does not hit all at once. It comes when you notice who got calmer after you were gone, and who seemed almost disappointed when you did not break. And that disappointment tells you more than their accusations ever did. When people seem unsettled by your stability, when they look irritated that you are quiet instead of shattered, you are no longer dealing with simple misunderstanding. You are looking at a group arrangement. The animal in that old ritual did not have to prove anything for the transfer to work. It only had to be accepted as the carrier. That is what makes this pattern so dangerous in ordinary life. Evidence is not always the engine. Agreement is. Number 4. They did not need the story to be strong. They needed it to be shared. That is why scapegoating spreads through glances, half-sentences, careful omissions, and those strange moments when several people start using the same language about you without ever admitting they compared notes. One says you are difficult. Another says you are a lot lately. Somebody else says they just feel off around you. None of it sounds serious by itself, but stack it together and you can hear the old ritual breathing under modern speech. The community wants one vessel for the tension, so the description does not even have to be precise. It just has to circulate. That is also why truth feels so slippery when you are inside it. You keep reaching for facts, but they are working with atmosphere. You want to answer one accusation, but the room is feeding on suggestion. You think, if I clear this up, the misunderstanding will end. But a scapegoat is not created by misunderstanding alone. It is maintained by emotional convenience. Once enough people benefit from a shared version of you, they start protecting that version. Sometimes with silence, sometimes with fake neutrality, sometimes by acting tired whenever your side of the story gets close to daylight. And let me say something plain, because you need this in your bones. If several people can never explain exactly what you did, but they all seem very sure you are the issue, you are not standing in clarity. You are standing under projection. They laid their sins on you in updated language, not with robes and altar smoke, maybe, but with side conversations, withheld context, and the cold little relief of finally having someone to point at. That is why your discernment kept firing, even when the facts looked blurry. Because in the next layer of this, it was not only the loud ones you had to watch, it was the quiet people who benefited from your name carrying the weight. And those quiet people are often the key to understanding the whole thing. The loud accuser gets attention, sure. The one who rolls their eyes, sends the sharp message, makes the scene, easy to spot. But the pattern holds because of the softer hands around it. The ones who sigh and say, I don't want to get involved. The ones who already know the story feels off, yet still let it settle on you because it keeps the room easier for them. In the old ritual, it was not only one man standing there, it was a whole camp benefiting from what the goat carried away. Number 5. Silence can still help load the burden. That is the part people hate to admit. The animal was driven into the wilderness alone, but the relief belonged to everybody who stayed behind. That means the comfort of the group was tied to one innocent carrier being sent out with blame that was never yours. So when you look back and remember who said nothing, do not dismiss that. Sometimes the deepest cooperation comes dressed as passivity. A person does not have to lead the charge to profit from your exile. They just have to prefer their comfort over the truth. You know the kind of silence I mean. The tight smile, the delayed reply, the way someone changes the subject when your name comes up, the way another person suddenly becomes too tired to hear your side clearly. No slammed doors, no dramatic speech, just a little cooling of the air, a little less warmth in the room, a little more distance than the situation deserved. And if your spirit picked up that shift, if your stomach sank before your mind knew why, it was because discernment can hear agreement even when nobody says it out loud. That is why the scapegoat is never only dealing with one enemy. It is dealing with a climate. A whole emotional weather system forms around the transfer. One person speaks, another confirms, another avoids, another shrugs, and soon the thing feels real, simply because it has been held by enough hands. That is how false narratives gain weight through repetition and emotional convenience. And once you see that, another painful truth starts showing itself. The people who benefited most from your being sent out were often the same ones who kept calling themselves neutral. And that false neutrality is where a lot of people get fooled. You think the danger is only in the person doing the talking, but the old ritual never worked because one voice was loud. It worked because the camp accepted the arrangement. The goat could be sent out because enough people agreed, silently or openly, that their relief mattered more than the innocence of the one carrying the load. That is why some of the coldest hands are the clean-looking ones. They never raise their voice. They never say the harshest words. They just leave the burden where it landed. Number 6. Those who call themselves neutral are often protecting the transfer, not always out of cruelty, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of convenience, sometimes because if they challenge the story, the weight starts sliding back toward the people who dropped it. And that is what they cannot allow. So they stay foggy. They say things like, "I'm sure everybody did something," or "I just don't want drama," while you stand there holding blame that was never yours. Do you see it? Neutrality in that kind of room becomes a padded wall for dishonesty. It softens the sound of injustice so the group can keep calling itself reasonable. This is why your spirit got tired in places where your mouth barely spoke. You were not exhausted only by conflict. You were worn down by carrying what nobody would name honestly. The air in those rooms felt strange, warm on the surface, but tight underneath. Smiles without safety, greetings without welcome. You could hear the cups clink, hear chairs scrape, hear everyday talk moving along, and still feel that one heavy current underneath it all. That was discernment showing you the transfer was still active. The burden had not lifted, it had only settled. And here's the part that stings. When the system needed a bearer, it did not only choose somebody it could accuse, it chose somebody it thought would keep caring. Somebody it thought would keep explaining, keep hoping, keep returning with an open heart. In other words, the innocence of the carrier was part of the design. A hard person is difficult to load. A cruel person pushes back too fast. But someone tender, someone sincere, someone still trying to understand. That kind of person can be made to hold group tension for a very long time. Which means the very quality that made you beautiful in spirit may be the same quality they learn to use. And once you see that, you have to ask a harder question. Why did they seem so invested in keeping you soft enough to carry it? And that is the harder question, because it takes you beyond accusation and into design. If they needed you gentle, reachable, still willing to listen, then what they were protecting was not just a story about you. They were protecting access. The old carrier had to stay available long enough for the burden to be placed, long enough for the camp to feel its release, long enough to walk out carrying what everyone else wanted off their chest. That means the setup did not begin when you were finally pushed out. It began much earlier, when they trained you to stay open while they kept shifting weight in your direction. Number 7. Sometimes what feels like care is only preparation for exile. That is why so many people get caught. Nobody walks up and says, "We are about to make you hold what belongs to all of us." No, it comes wrapped in softer cloth. "We're just concerned. You've changed. We miss the old you. Why are you making this so difficult?" Hear the tone of it. Warm on the outside, tightening underneath. It sounds like invitation, but it acts like positioning. It keeps you close enough to receive the load and confused enough to think love is still there. That is how many carriers get taught to cooperate with their own removal. First, they are nudged to doubt themselves. Then they are encouraged to over-explain. Then they are rewarded for staying calm under crooked pressure. Then, when the full transfer lands, They are too tangled in self-questioning to call it what it is. You start trying to recover the mood instead of defending the truth. You start chasing harmony with people who are already arranging your departure. And all the while, the room keeps acting as if you are being helped. But help does not leave you smaller, foggier, and easier to blame. You know that feeling, don't you? The conversation ends. The words sounded polite enough, but your neck is hot, your stomach is tight, and the silence afterward feels heavier than the talk itself. That is not you being dramatic. That is your spirit noticing that correction is being used like a hallway, one that leads away from belonging. It is the same old movement, just dressed in cleaner language. They wanted you compliant while they prepared to have you driven into the wilderness. And the cruelest part is this. By the time the room finally turns on you out loud, they have often already spent weeks, sometimes longer, teaching you to wonder whether the burden really belongs to you. And that is exactly how the trap gets inside your own mind. Through accusation from the outside and repetition on the inside. By the time the group is done positioning you, you are no longer just carrying their version of events. You are wrestling with their version of you. That is the deeper danger. The animal in that ancient rite did not consent to what was spoken over it. But human beings can be pressured into doing something worse, agreeing with the burden. Number 8. The goal was never just to send you out. It was to make you walk out wearing a name that did not belong to you. That is what scapegoating does when it matures. First, it places tension on you. Then, it places meaning on you. Suddenly, you are not just the person who is present during a hard season. You become the problem. You are not just the one who asked a question. You become difficult. You are not just the one who reacted to pressure. You become unstable. Do you see how slick that is? A whole group avoids its own reflection by turning one living person into a label. And once that label sticks, the room starts acting like it has always been true. People begin speaking to the title, not to you. They stop asking what happened and start responding to what has already been decided. That is why it can feel so lonely even before you are fully pushed out. You are standing there, hearing your own name, but it no longer sounds like your life. It sounds edited, flattened, reduced. Like somebody took a full human being and shrank them into a caution sign everyone else could point at. This is where discernment becomes more than a warning system. It becomes rescue. Because when your spirit starts whispering, that is not your name. It is trying to keep your soul from fusing with blame that was never yours. And if you do not catch that moment, shame will do what accusation alone could not. Shame will make you cooperate. Shame will make you apologize for things you never owned. Shame will make you bow under a weight just because many hands placed it there. That is why so many people stay bound long after the room goes quiet. The voices leave, but the borrowed identity remains. And if you do not break that agreement, you can end up carrying their confession farther than they ever could have pushed you on their own. And that is where the real captivity begins. Not when they speak over you, but when you start repeating it to yourself. The camp may have gone back to its business. The room may have cooled down. The messages may have slowed. But if that false name keeps echoing in your own chest, then the transfer is still working. The carrier has left the circle, but the circle is still living inside the carrier. So some people are driven into the wilderness long after the conversation ended. Their body left. Their agreement didn't. Number 9. Discernment does not only warn you about other people, it warns you about false ownership. That quiet voice in you, the one that kept saying, "Something is off here," was not just trying to help you spot who was dishonest. It was trying to stop you from signing for a package with your name on it that was never meant for your soul. Because once you accept the label, once you start shaping your identity around the pressure they put on you, the burden settles deeper than any accusation ever could. This is why shame is such a dangerous servant in the life of a scapegoat. Shame does not need a crowd to keep working. It can operate in a silent kitchen, a parked car, a late night shower, a dark bedroom where your mind replays old conversations and edits yourself into the villain. It can make your shoulders tighten, your jaw lock, your stomach turn, even while the people who laid their sins on you are sleeping just fine. Shame is how borrowed blame keeps breathing after the room has moved on. But hear me clearly. The fact that you felt ashamed does not mean you were guilty. It means you were human, tender enough to care, sincere enough to question yourself, honest enough to revisit your own part. That is what made you vulnerable to the transfer, yes. But it is also what makes your recovery possible. Because a hard heart cannot hear correction from heaven. A living spirit can. And that means the same inner sensitivity they used to bend you can become the very thing that pulls you free. Still, freedom does not begin with everybody finally admitting what they did. It begins the moment you stop calling yourself by the name the burden gave you. That is the first break in the chain. Small, quiet, almost invisible at first, but decisive. And once that break happens, something else starts to shift. The wilderness no longer feels only like punishment. It starts to feel like the first place where nobody can keep renaming you. And that is the turn most people never see coming. The place that felt like banishment starts becoming the first honest ground you have stood on in a long time. No spinning looks, no managed concern. No one adjusting the story in real time while smiling at you. Just quiet. Just space. Just the strange sound of your own thoughts returning to you without interruption. The wilderness is harsh, yes, but harsh is not always hostile. Sometimes harsh is clean. Number 10. Separation can reveal what closeness kept hiding. When that old bearer was sent away, the camp called it order. They called it cleansing. They called it relief. But once the carrier was gone, the truth of the arrangement became easier to read. The burden had been moved, not healed. And the same thing happens when you step back from a room that kept naming you incorrectly. At first, all you feel is the sting, the cold pillow, the tight chest, the silence where familiar noise used to be. But then little things begin to surface. Your breathing changes. Your thoughts stop racing as much. You notice that confusion was strongest around certain people, not everywhere. That matters, because the wilderness does something the crowd never will. It gives you contrast. You start remembering how often you felt small before you even spoke, how often you apologized just to settle the air, how often you walked away from conversations with that dull ache in your ribs, like you had just agreed to something without meaning to. In separation, those moments stop blending together. They sharpen, they line up. And what used to feel like random pain begins to look like a pattern. This is where the scapegoat starts becoming dangerous to the system. Dangerous because you are seeing clearly. A person who can finally compare peace with pressure is much harder to control. Once you know what your body feels like away from constant assignment, you stop calling torment normal. Once your spirit gets a breath of clean air, you stop confusing tension with love. And listen carefully. That is why some people panic when you pull back. It is not only that they miss your presence, it is that distance interrupts the transfer. The farther you get from their atmosphere, the harder it becomes for blame that was never yours to keep feeling natural. Which means the next thing they often do is try to pull you close again, not to restore you, but to see whether you will carry it one more time. And that pull can sound almost tender when it shows up. A check in. A soft apology with no real ownership. A, we miss you. A, can we talk? A message that lands on your screen late at night, glowing in the dark, stirring up all the old hope. This is why you have to stay awake in spirit. Because when the camp misses its carrier, it does not always come back with repentance. Sometimes it comes back with sweetness, just enough to see whether the old opening is still there. Number 11. Not every invitation is a return, and not every welcome is safe. The same group that felt calmer once you were gone can become strangely restless when you stop carrying what kept them comfortable. Why? Because distance exposed the pattern. Once you stepped back, the weight started shifting again. The tension they had parked on you began looking for somewhere else to land. And that is when people who seemed done with you can suddenly become very interested in reconnecting. Not because truth woke them up, but because the arrangement is wobbling. Watch the details. The conversation starts gentle, but it moves quickly toward your tone, your reaction, your part. The air changes. The old fog starts creeping back. You feel it in your body before the words fully form. That tightness in the jaw, that little drop in the stomach, that sense that the room is trying to edit you again while pretending to hear you. That is discernment doing its work. It is warning you that the system needed a bearer before, and it may still be searching for one now. A real repair leaves you clearer. A disguised transfer leaves you confused. This is where many people get recaptured. They mistake access for accountability. They think if they reached out, maybe they finally understand. But the scapegoat has to learn a painful, holy lesson. Being wanted is not the same as being honored. Being invited back is not the same as being seen. If the burden is still sliding toward you by the end of the conversation, then the ritual never ended. It just changed tone. And let me tell you what really unsettles them. It is not your anger or your distance by itself. It is the moment you can feel the old weight moving toward you, and you do not bend down to pick it up. And that refusal is where the old arrangement begins to shake. The moment you stop reaching for the burden out of habit, the moment you let it sit there without claiming it, the room changes. Those who once looked composed start sounding strained. Conversations that used to glide along suddenly catch. The same ones who seemed so certain can become restless, irritated, even wounded that you are not stepping into the familiar role. Why? Because the transfer depends on cooperation, and cooperation just got interrupted. Number 12. A scapegoat becomes dangerous the second it stops agreeing. That is not because you turned cruel. It is not because you became hard-hearted. It is because the whole setup was built on your willingness to carry what was handed to you. Once that willingness changes, even quietly, the hidden order starts losing its smoothness. The group may still try the same old moves, the sigh, the concern, the selective memory, the polished, we all made mistakes line that somehow still leaves the weight nearest your feet. But now your spirit can feel the difference between confession and transfer. And that changes everything. So some people react so strongly to simple boundaries. You say less. You answer more slowly. You stop over-explaining. You do not chase after every crooked impression. You let silence stand where you once rushed in with apologies. And suddenly, those who called you emotional start acting unsettled. Those who said they wanted peace seem unable to rest. That is not random. That is what happens when blame that was never yours can no longer find an easy home in you. The old ritual helps you see it clearly. The animal carried the wrongs away, and the camp got its breath back. But when the carrier in real life stops taking the load, the group has to face something it has avoided for a long time. The weight did not vanish. It is still here. It still belongs somewhere. And if it cannot be parked on you, then it starts drifting back toward those who first needed relief. That is when agitation rises. That is when misunderstandings become urgent. That is when the so-called neutral voices suddenly want closure. You need to pay attention in that moment. Because what comes next can look like reconciliation. But if you listen closely, you may hear fear under the kindness, fear under the apology, fear under the sudden need to clear the air. And fear tells the truth long before words do. And fear always leaks through the seams. You can hear it in the rushed kindness, in the too careful phrasing, in the way somebody suddenly wants peace now that you are no longer carrying the strain for them. They may call it closure. They may call it maturity. They may call it moving forward. But if the urgency only appears after you stopped bending under the old role, then what you are seeing is not always healing. Sometimes it is panic with a softer voice. Number 13. Your clarity threatens the arrangement even if you never expose anyone out loud. That is what makes a healed carrier so unsettling. You do not have to gather people in a room. You do not have to publish the whole story. You do not have to win some dramatic public moment. If you simply stop wearing the label, stop volunteering for the burden, stop performing guilt so others can feel clean, the whole pattern starts losing power. The group may still keep its version alive for a while, yes, but something has already shifted in the unseen. The transfer no longer lands the same way. This is why they can become preoccupied with your tone, your boundaries, your distance, your failure to react the old way. They are not always upset because you are cruel. They are often upset because you are no longer readable through the script they built for you. The scapegoat was supposed to carry, absorb, explain, and then disappear quietly into the edge of the story. But when that person remains whole, not loud, not frantic, just whole, it exposes the weakness of the system. Suddenly, the burden looks mobile again. Suddenly, the innocence of the camp looks less certain. And I need you to hear this with your whole chest. Sometimes your greatest act of truth is refusing to embody a lie. That kind of refusal has weight. It makes old alliances strain. It makes hidden agreements wobble. It forces people to face the possibility that what they laid on you may have been their own reflection all along. That is why some people seem almost haunted by your calm. Because every time they see you standing without the burden, every time they realize blame that was never yours did not destroy you, they are brought back to the one thing they were trying to escape in the first place: their own part in what was placed on your head. And that is the part they never planned for. They planned for your collapse, your confusion, your endless explaining. They planned for you to keep carrying the atmosphere so they could keep calling themselves clean. What they did not plan for was the return of memory. What was said, how it felt, the stale air, the rehearsed concern, the way your body used to tighten before certain calls, certain doors, certain names. Once that memory comes back without the old fog on it, the whole arrangement starts looking very different. Number 14. Healing a scapegoat is dangerous because it restores sequence. While you were inside the pressure, everything blurred together. You could not always tell what came first, their tension or your reaction, their silence or your apology, their accusation or your shrinking. But once clarity begins to return, the order of things starts lining up. You remember that the room was already uneasy before you said a word. You remember that they were already avoiding their own part before they highlighted yours. You remember that the label came before the evidence, and that restored order is devastating to a false story, because lies survive best in emotional fog. This is why you do not need to force every detail to prove what happened. Sometimes the deepest proof is pattern. The high priest put both hands on the animal and confessed the people's wrongs over it. The transfer came first. The journey into isolation came after. The same structure repeats in ordinary life. First, the burden is assigned. Then, the name gets attached. Then, the person is sent outward, carrying weight that belongs to the whole group. Once you see that order, you cannot keep blaming yourself the same way. You start noticing that your problem often began where other people's discomfort was looking for a place to land. And hear me, that is why some people become nervous when you get calm. Calm is not forgetfulness. Calm is not weakness. Calm often means the pieces are finally falling into place. It means your soul is no longer spending all its strength surviving the confusion. It means you are beginning to read the ritual in the right order. And once that happens, something shifts in the air around the old story. It starts sounding thinner, less holy, less convincing. Because when sequence is restored, so is responsibility. And the moment responsibility starts moving back toward the ones who first dropped the weight, you learn who really needed the wilderness and who only needed you to think it was yours. And once responsibility starts drifting back toward its true owners, you come to a crossroads. This is where many carriers are tempted to do the very thing that was done to them. Strike back fast, force the room, make somebody else wear the heat. I understand that temptation. After being loaded down for so long, revenge can feel like balance. But the old pattern is not broken by reversal alone. If all you do is throw the burden back with the same spirit it came in, the transfer is still ruling the room. Number 15. What breaks this pattern is not revenge, but refusal. Refusal to hold blame that was never yours. Refusal to perform guilt so other people can feel settled. Refusal to keep translating your pain into language that protects the comfort of those who assigned it. This is holy work, and it is harder than anger. Anger can flare hot and fast. Refusal is quieter. It stands still. It lets the burden fall where it falls. It says, without shouting, I will not carry this for you anymore. Such refusal changes the whole feel of a conversation. The old hooks stop catching. The baited question hangs in the air unanswered. The push for mutual understanding does not end with you apologizing for the whole atmosphere. You stop chasing resolution that requires your self-betrayal. You stop treating every accusation like an emergency. You stop bowing your head every time tension enters the room. And that is when the people around the old setup begin to realize something uncomfortable. The system needed someone, and the familiar bearer is no longer available. Do not miss how serious this is. In the ancient ritual, the creature was driven into the wilderness carrying the wrongs of many. In modern life, the pattern survives by making one person think endurance is the same thing as agreement. But endurance is not surrender. Patience is not permission. Mercy is not consent. You can remain soft in heart and still refuse the load. You can stay honest and still decline the role. You can walk away without becoming the very thing that wounded you. And here is what separates healing from repetition. If you do not learn the difference between compassion and carrying, you can walk out of one false transfer only to place the same weight on the next vulnerable person who crosses your path. And that is where the message turns from survival to responsibility. Because once you understand how this burden moves, once you can feel the transfer before the words are even finished, you are no longer just someone who escaped it. You become someone who can interrupt it. The old pattern does not only live in cruel people, it can live in tired people, wounded people, disappointed people, even decent people who want relief faster than truth. That is why you must stay awake. Number 16. Healed people do not go looking for a new carrier. That sounds simple, but it is one of the deepest tests of whether you are truly free. The person who has been loaded down for years can become fiercely allergic to discomfort. And if you are not careful, the first time a room gets tense, the first time somebody disappoints you, the first time confusion rises, you may feel the urge to do what was done to you. Simplify the whole mess by finding one person to hold it. One difficult one. One dramatic one. One easy explanation. That is how the old ritual survives in modern clothes. So pay attention to what happens in you when pressure builds. Do you reach for truth or for a target? Do you slow down enough to separate fact from feeling? Or do you just want the air to clear as fast as possible, no matter who ends up wearing the cloud? This matters, because the same soul that once carried blame that was never yours can, if left unhealed, become skilled at spotting the next tender person in the room and handing the burden off without even calling it by name. Pain can teach compassion, yes, but pain can also teach shortcuts. That is why discernment is not only defensive, it is corrective. It does not just whisper, "Watch them." It also whispers, "Watch yourself." Watch the urge to make one person represent the problem of the whole group. Watch the temptation to collapse a complex atmosphere into a single face. Watch how quickly a room can bond over shared irritation. The ancient picture is still there: hands, confession, transfer, relief. Only now it happens through side comments, selective memory, and the hungry desire to feel clean without doing the work. And if you are truly coming out of the wilderness changed, then this is where the proof begins. Not when you tell your story, but when you refuse to turn the next wounded person into your own version of the offering. And that is where your name begins to clear, even before anybody admits a thing. Not because the whole room suddenly wakes up, not because every lie is dragged into daylight all at once, but because something deeper has already happened. The burden stopped sticking. The words may still be out there. The old version of you may still circulate in certain corners. But inside, where it matters most, The false ownership is breaking. And once that breaks, the whole sound of the story changes. Number 17, your freedom starts before their confession. You need to hear that because too many carriers stay spiritually chained while waiting for public vindication. They think, when they finally tell the truth, then I'll be free. When they finally apologize, then I'll breathe. No. If your peace depends entirely on those who laid their sins on you, then they still have too much access to your inner world. Freedom begins when your spirit no longer asks the guilty for permission to be innocent. That does not mean truth does not matter. It matters deeply. But truth has more than one doorway. Sometimes it enters through public exposure. Sometimes through time. Sometimes through the quiet unraveling of patterns everybody pretended not to see. And sometimes it enters when you simply stand there, no longer shaped by blame that was never yours, no longer available for the old script, no longer eager to defend yourself inside a crooked frame. Such steadiness speaks louder than panic ever could. This is why the scapegoat who survives with their soul intact becomes such a threat. The camp counted on relief. It counted on distance. It counted on that creature disappearing under the meaning assigned to it. But when the one sent away comes into clarity instead of collapse, the ritual is exposed without a single dramatic speech. Suddenly, people can feel it. The old story does not sit right anymore. The room may not say it openly, but the air shifts. The same narrative that once sounded solid starts rattling. Cracks appear in timing, in tone, in memory, in motive. And let me tell you, some of those cracks are already there now. That uneasy silence in certain people, that strange over-explaining, that sudden desire to check on you after months of distance, it is not random. It is what happens when a false burden stops doing its job and starts sliding back toward the hands that first placed it. And the final test is not whether you can see that happening. It is whether, when the weight starts moving again, you will know what to do with it. And when the weight starts moving again, you do not have to catch it. That is the ending of this matter. The real ending is quieter than a courtroom scene, quieter than some grand performance where everybody falls to their knees and says your name correctly at last. It happens when the old pressure returns, maybe through a message, maybe through a conversation, maybe through that same familiar tone, trying one more time to make you responsible for the whole weather in the room. And you feel it, you recognize it, and you let it pass by without making a home in you. That is where the chain breaks. Number 18. The final victory is not being welcomed back into a crooked camp. It is knowing what belongs to your hands and what does not. The old ritual in Leviticus 16 had its place, its priest, its season, its meaning. But the counterfeit version people perform in everyday life has no right to your soul. You are not here to keep another person's conscience tidy. You are not here to make a fearful circle feel pure by becoming its carrier. The scapegoat was sent away with the people's wrongs on its head, but you were not born to wander under a load assembled by other mouths. So when the next room starts looking around for relief, when tension thickens and eyes begin searching for someone soft enough to hold it, do not bow just because you know how. Do not kneel under old training. Let responsibility return to the hands that formed it. Let silence expose what manipulation used to hide. Let your spirit stay clean, even if the room stays uneasy. That is not rebellion. That is truth, finally standing up straight. A burden that is truly yours will fit your hands when you lift it. The false one always bruises first. By evening, the dust has settled. The gate is still, the air cooler now, and somewhere beyond the noise of the camp, one path lies open under a pale strip of sky. No voices follow it, no hands reach across it. Just the sound of your own steps, steady and unclaimed. If this met you where you live, stay close. Subscribe and leave a word in the comments if this uncovered something you've been carrying too long.